All right, welcome everyone to the first committee meeting for the Adjudication Committee. Here to consider a project on non-lawyer assistance and representation. I am Leah Robbins, the staff counsel on this project, also co-leading the project with Matthew Gluth, Deputy Research Director. And before we take roll, I'm going to turn it over to ACUS's chair, Andy Foyce, to give some remarks.
Thank you, Leah. Welcome everyone, as Leah said, to this first meeting of the Adjudication Committee for this cycle. Welcome and thank you for working with us on this project. I think it's an exciting one. The non-lawyer assistance and representation turns out to be mostly an adjudication, so that's perfect for this committee. It's a subject that ACUS has a long history with, going back 40 years, as Amy summarized in her excellent report. More recently than that, we've worked with the Legal Aid Interagency Roundtable run by the White House, and I see that several people from LAIR were planning on being with us today. We also did a partnership with the Legal Services Corporation and a big product on model rules of representation that that Matt and the working group worked on very hard. A special thanks today to our chair Nadine, to consultant Amy Widman, who wrote I think just an excellent report. And to our lawyers, our attorney advisors on the project, Leah and Matt Gluth. And so that's all I really wanted to say. I look forward to the work and thank you very much for being here and helping us with it. So Leah, back to you.
Great, thanks, Andy. So I will be calling two rolls. The first roll will be the names of committee members and any alternates of committee members. After each name is called, if you could please say here so we can make sure your mic is working, that would be great. Nadine?
Here.
Nicole Karam, alternate for Eric Benderson.
Here.
David Ingstrom.
Here.
Claire Evans.
Here.
Dan Ho. Adam Kress.
Here.
Richard Thrasher, alternate for Patrick Nagel.
Here.
Thank you. Channing Strother. Chris Walker.
I'm here.
You. Melissa Wasserman. I don't know if that was Melissa or some background noise. Okay, we'll keep moving. Russell Wheeler. Thank you. David Quinn.
Here.
Thank you. And are there any committee members present whose name I did not call? No? Okay. The second roll will be the names of ACUS members who are not on the committee and their alternates. After each name is called, again, if you could please say here so we can make sure your mic is working, that would be great. I will not be calling the names of any members of the public who do not have speaking privileges. So if you do want to speak, please write in the chat and wait to be called on. So Jennifer Kelly Kennedy, alternate for Dan Cohen.
Here.
Thank you. Nina Olson.
Here.
Amy Roseman Orr, alternate for Helen Serasio. Are there any other ACUS members present whose name I did not call? Okay, well then Nadine, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks. I just, at the top, I want to welcome our newest member, David Quinn, who's joined us from the VA. Welcome, David. For your benefit and for everyone's, we'll go over the ground rules. Most of us know these by heart. We're going to go over them anyways. So please note that only ACUS members, which includes government members and their designated alternates, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not on the committee, and their designated alternates have full speaking privileges, meaning a non-ACUS member should write in the chat if you would like to speak. To avoid background noise, please keep your microphone on mute and either use the hand raise function or add a comment in the chat feature if you would like to speak. And then I will call on you and you can unmute yourself, say your piece, and then remute yourself when you're done. I'd also ask that ACUS members and their designated alternates use the webcam if possible. And then with respect to attendees other than ACUS members and alternates, participation requires unanimous consent of the committee members. So time permitting, I will consider calling on such attendees at appropriate points. And we will assume that committee members consent absent raising an objection. If any such participant would like to speak, please use the chat feature to indicate there, or use the hand raise feature and wait to speak until I call on you. You can unmute yourself and then remute yourself when you're done. For all participants, please use the chat function only to indicate that you would like to speak. Please do not hold any sidebar discussions or put substantive comments in the chat feature. Tell us those comments, please. And then if we get to a vote, which we may not today, but eventually, only members of the committee have a vote. So please do not vote unless you're a member of the committee. And Leah and I have a list of committee members in case you're not sure where you fall. Okay, so I am going to do a brief introduction here of Professor Amy Woodman. We are in great hands with her. And I'd like to let people know, who the person is that we're going to hear about who did this phenomenal report for us today. So Professor Woodman joined Rutgers Law School in 2019, and she teaches torts, administrative law, legal writing, and law and inequality, which I think is a great range of legal areas. And not surprisingly, in 2021, students and faculty awarded her Professor of the Year. Her scholarship focuses on how our justice systems can better address inequality through increasing access, which is perfect for what we're going to talk about today. And her work in this area has been published in numerous journals and law reviews, including the Harvard Journal on Legislation, Yale Law and Policy Review, and Administrative Law Review. Previously, Professor Woodman was an associate professor of law at Northern Illinois University College of Law and deputy director at the National Center for Access to Justice at Fordham Law School. And in 2022, she was named a law faculty fellow at the Office of General Counsel for OMB. Professor Woodman received a JD from NYU Law School and a BA in comparative literature and creative writing, which is also very cool, from Northwestern University. She clerked for Magistrate Judge Theodore H. Katz of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, and she is a member of the New York Bar. So I welcome Professor Woodman, and I look forward to hearing your remarks about your report.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me and thanks for engaging with this report. I just want to say at the outset, I've been having some connection issues, so I hope that everything will go smoothly. But if not, I will try to sign back on. I know there's some of you on the call today too who took the time to speak with me during the production of this report, and I really do thank you for sharing your expertise in helping this report come about. I just want to very briefly kind of give an overview of the report structure and its main findings so that everyone has full context before the discussion turns toward the recommendations. And I just want to start by highlighting the terminology used here, particularly how the report addresses the spectrum of representation, all the way from self-representation to assistance to full non-lawyer representation. There is a definition section in the report, but very briefly, the report considers representation broadly. So I included situations where a family member or a friend is accompanying or assisting someone at a hearing. I know some might think of that more in a self-representative mode, but for this report, that's considered representation. And when the report considers assistance, it encompasses educating someone, possibly counseling someone about their rights or the process, and including in some cases navigating applications and forms. So the report generally maps out the landscape of non-lawyer representation, and there's really two kind of buckets of things to consider when you're looking at this landscape. And the first is the nature of the adjudication at issue. As you all know, there's a variety types of adjudication that take place throughout the federal administrative agencies. And these, we can think about these in terms of how formal they are, if we want to talk about the type A, B, and C kind of categorization, but all the way from an APA type hearing or to a statutory evidentiary hearing, to an inquisitorial hearing, or to even sometimes to pre-hearing decision-making processes that take place kind of almost before we get to an adjudication. And then also within that bucket is the type of expertise that really is on display in the adjudication, whether that's formal legal expertise or other types of specialized technical expertise, or even maybe a factual kind of lived experience expertise. So that's kind of one bucket of things to keep in mind when mapping out the types of non-lawyer representation and assistance we have. The other bucket of things is the various regulatory models that exist that govern non-lawyer representation and assistance throughout federal agencies. So here, the report goes through kind of 6 types of regulatory models. The first is, I think, the one most people go immediately to in their mind, which is the detailed regulatory schemes we see at DOJ with the accredited reps, or at VA or at SSA, and those non-lawyer programs. And but there's other examples of regulatory programs throughout the federal agencies. The second one is the type of specialized expertise we see maybe at patents or in certain tax matters, where you have someone who's maybe an accountant or a patent agent, doing the non-lawyer representation. A third type of regulatory model we see is something the report calls institutional or familial pro se, which is where within the regulations, there's some language like somebody with knowledge of the institution, perhaps a corporate officer or superintendent or something, stands in the shoes of the institution. Or sometimes you see in a familial sense, somebody with knowledge of the participant stands in the shoes of the participant. So that's kind of like this pro se, yet kind of given over to either a person to represent an institution or a person to represent a family member or a close friend. The fourth model we see is individual choice, which is where the language is something along the lines of, you're entitled to a representative of your choosing, but there's not much more. And it really is up to the individual to decide who they feel is qualified to represent them in that situation. And then we see the assistance programs, which is best exemplified by kind of the Navigators program at HHS or the HUD housing counselors, where there are kind of detailed regulatory schemes, but they don't rise to the level of representation. They're assistance programs where people can get certified to help others navigate, processes along the way. And I also include in the report a section on state programs, which are really born from legal aid and often with support from the various state, whatever state that it's in, to allow non-lawyer representation in particular matters. So the report focuses on matters that implement federal programs. We see this with SNAP benefits or disaster relief. The Community Justice Workers Program is kind of the big model there. So the most well-developed regulatory schemes are found in the non-APA evidentiary, what we might say type B, or sometimes we refer to these as mass justice kinds of adjudications, but there are examples of non-lawyer representation and assistance in all types of adjudications, from the very formal APA adjudications all the way down to pre-decision points for very informal type C adjudications. But there is a lot of confusion and inconsistency around the various practices. So the report identifies that lack of availability of representation was a recurring issue in a number of programs, even in programs that have lots of representation, like at SSA, there still might be lack of representation early in the process. Additionally, in some cases, as I mentioned, there might be very sparse codified requirements. It might just say a qualified representative, but very little detail about what makes someone qualified, and no accreditation or oversight. So that can lead to some confusion about what is required. And that confusion can sometimes lead to a lack of involvement and investment and opportunities that might expand non-lawyer representation. So a crucial point of the report is that there isn't a one size fits all answer here. formal detailed regulatory accreditation processes might not be appropriate for every adjudication. There are, of course, times where it is, and in those cases, stakeholders that I spoke with wanted more clarity and collaboration and support for those programs. But there are other times where the nature of the expertise lends itself to an outside accreditation, like a professional licensing exam, or many situations where we have the current status is just a kind of fairly vague regulation or other norm that non-lawyer representation is permitted, but without more information. And it's these cases, I think, where agencies could benefit from assessing the nature of the representation and opportunities to coordinate and expand non-lawyer practice, which is to say, I don't think the report should be read to endorse detailed certification programs across the board. There's a real danger to over-credentializing these programs, but calibrating the type of accreditation, training, and oversight necessary for the various types of adjudication is more the goal. I quickly just want to kind of highlight some recurring themes that came up throughout almost all of the interviews I did and really are embedded throughout the report. And the first of those is the importance of community. Almost everyone mentioned the value of having representation from one's community, and that particularly the type of deep factual knowledge that shared community members have, how that knowledge can strengthen the representation process. So one takeaway here is that it's important for agencies to consider community expertise when regulating non-lawyer practice and when thinking about expanding their programs. Collaboration is another theme that I heard from just about everyone I spoke to, and it took many different forms. Collaboration is needed in this area. I heard from so many with nonprofits, with law schools for training and implementation, with state bars as partners in state regulatory reform efforts, with academics for information sharing that can then help to evaluate existing programs and generate expansive policies going forward. A third theme that I think is embedded throughout the report is the connection to burden reduction efforts generally. So expanding forms of representation and assistance, intricately connected to other burden reduction efforts already underway, the simplification efforts that we've talked so much about, and the burden reduction efforts that are already underway also can help to create a adjudicatory process that blends nicely with the goals of training and professionalizing a variety of supports and a variety of types of representation. Burden reduction efforts focused on educating people about processes also create built-in mechanisms to amplify non-lawyer representation. And then finally, as you all probably expect, funding and support came up in almost all of my interviews, specifically the resources that are needed for agencies to run these accreditation programs and the support needed by the nonprofits and others to implement the trainings and staff non-lawyers. Associated concerns here were the need for consistency in program and accreditation requirements in order to plan better staffing needs, and reducing the time needed to become accredited and allowing accredited folks to be able to keep their accreditation from one nonprofit to another. The idea of portability and professionalization of non-lawyer representation. And just on a very last note, the need for data was something that kind of permeated most of these discussions too. We really don't know how often non-lawyer participation is happening. We don't know entirely much about the content of various training and continuing ed programs and how well they're working to grow participation where needed. And we don't know much about how people fare. And I know that outcomes tracking is a whole discussion in and of itself, but most agreed it would be good to understand generally how people fare with various forms of representation. And that includes also the participants' experience with their representation, regardless of the decisional outcome. So anecdotally, I just want to end by sharing that I heard repeatedly that non-lawyers are performing as well as lawyer representatives, and in some cases better due to their specialized expertise, and that overall there's a lot of enthusiasm for building more opportunity in this area. And I just thank you for your time, and I really look forward to hearing the discussion about the recommendations. So I'm happy to take any questions. That was a very quick overview of the report. I encourage you to read it if you haven't, but I can also just answer questions if there are any. Thanks.
I will open if there's any questions you have for Amy at this point on the report or what she just explained. Okay. Doesn't mean you can't ask them at some point, but so we'll get started on the draft. I'm gonna let Leah put it up. Yep. Oh my goodness, so tiny. I have to make that bigger for me. Wonderful. Okay. So I was thinking we'd start with the preamble, but I see we have the recommendation up. I think if we could start with the, no, there we go. Because I do want to start with the title. So I don't know if everyone's had a chance to review the comments that we received from two esteemed members of the committee, Russell Wheeler and Jeff Lubbers. Jeff is not with us, but Russell is. And so this first comment is a general comment, which echoes something that I thought of as well when I was reviewing this. So Russell, did you want to speak to your comment at all?
It's nothing profound. It's just that the preface and the recommendations as I read it seem to give it more emphasis to representation as distinct from assistance. So it just seemed a little illogical to frame the document leading off with assistance. I mean, I don't think it's a profound difference, but it could be a bit misleading for someone just coming to it cold. Nothing more than that.
Right. Any thoughts, any comments about that? Discussion? Okay, let's adjust it then. Nobody has any objections. I think that makes good sense, Russell. I realize not profound, but I think it makes good sense. Great, thank you. Okay, we can resolve that comment and move to the first paragraph of the preamble. And I see there's an edit here from Jeff, which at line 4 and 5. But I open the floor. Oh, good, Nina.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand on an updated Zoom. This is actually to the title. I
Okay,
actually
great.
think it should be assistance and representation because assistance is what you provide before you even get into representation. So I think it tracks the actual individual's experience of the legal or administrative procedure, that you may need assistance in understanding a form before you get to representation.
Any comments? Reactions? Actually might call on Amy here to talk a little bit about her thoughts in this area. I did hear you say in your intro comments that assistance is almost a subset of representation or considered a form of representation. Did I hear that right, Amy?
No, I think my comments actually track what Nina had said, and that it's the stuff leading up to what we think of as appearing and hearing, right? And so it's maybe early counseling, helping someone navigate a form or document in the very pre-stages to leading up to something. So if we think of it temporally, I mean, I guess assistance comes before representation. If we think of it, you know, if we think of it in terms of like the bulk of the report, I think it's right that the bulk of the report is really talking about representation. So it can go either way.
And I think Russell's point, your point was the bulk of the recommendations.
Yes, and throughout the like down in line 7, that representation and assistance, that sequence, it pervades the preface. So if you change the title back to where it was, query whether you have to change the terminology throughout the report.
So I just want to point out, we do later define assistance and representation, with assistance being broader and including all types of help, including representation. And I'll also note that that definition and the title came from a prior ACUS recommendation, 86-1. So for whatever that is worth, I just wanted to point that out while discussing this.
Amy, did you have a reaction to that?
Just to Russell's point, he's right. I mean, even in the definitions on the report, the first definition is representation, the next one is assistance, right? And then in the different types, it's 5 types of representation and then assistance. So the structure there is a little bit flipped.
Any further thoughts, reactions? Nina?
Well, I'll just reiterate that I think that we should be tracking the individual's experience with the administrative system. And that's just my feeling that the original statement is correct. And if we need to reorganize some things so that it tracks that focus, assistance, and then representation, or broader assistance and representation is some part of that assistance, then the rest of the report should reflect that. That's just my personal opinion.
The bit that Leah helpfully pointed us to is that assistance is considered broader. Russell, any further reaction to that?
I'm looking at recommendation 3 on page 5 at the top, which the first 2 recommendations deal with representation, and then the third one refers to other forms of assistance, which, obviously by its terms embraces representation, but it's still treating it as a subcategory. I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world. I just, as a reader, was a little disjointed when I read. I was expecting to read all about assistance, and then it starts off and talks mainly about representation, a subset of same. I don't feel really strongly about it, but it just seems to me there's a certain sequence that gets laid out and ought to be followed in the title. But I really don't have any more to add.
Okay. Well, perhaps we can put a pin in this and think about it as we go through the rest of the draft. See, it ended up being more profound than you thought, Russell. We can leave the comment. That's great. Thanks, Leah. Let's go to the first paragraph of the preamble. And if there's any objections to Jeff's suggestions there, or if anyone has any other thoughts on that first paragraph, lines 1 through 6. Okay, I think we're good. We can go with Jeff's suggestions.
I will note that Jeff's suggestion on line 3 and 4 would be many or most.
What's a choice? Got you.
Yeah,
Okay.
so just whichever one.
We could leave that to committee on style.
Okay.
Unless someone has a strong reaction to many or most. I think we're good. Okay. I'll let you guys pick. Thanks. Let's start then with the second paragraph, and I guess we're going to butt up against here this representation and other forms of assistance. So this would track the title as it was originally. No, it wouldn't. Assistance came first in the title. And again, this is Russell's suggestion that, I know, do you want to speak to that comment there?
Yeah,
Russell?
it wasn't so much that as it was, I read in the title, non-lawyer assistance and representation, and then I read at line 6, representation and other forms of assistance, and I just asked myself, were we talking here about representation broadly by lawyers and by others? and then go on later because then later the text and about page 3 starts talking about non-lawyer representation. So I was just a little confused, and I thought other readers might be, whether we're talking from the get-go about non-lawyer representation, and if so, it ought to be so defined here on line 6, or whether or not this first paragraph is just a general statement about representation of participants, be it by lawyers or by non-lawyers, and then we zero down. It's nothing, it's like I say before, nothing profound. I was just a little confused what was being discussed here, and suggested, if it is indeed, this is a more general paragraph, I just suggested some alternative language that might make that clear. At the bottom of my comment, representation and adjudication proceedings, whether by lawyers or non-lawyers, and other forms of assistance.
Well, maybe it's not R. Any thoughts about the suggested language that Russell has proposed? I think it makes sense to make clear that we're talking broadly. I think we're talking broadly there. That there's value always in having someone help you out.
Yes,
Whether
that
it's
was the intent.
yeah.
And then we
Okay.
get into non-lawyer.
Yeah, we drill down, as Russell said. Okay, great. If we could put that language in, yeah. And is? Where's I need Jack Bierman and Hy Feldblum. They would help us with grammar here. Representation is particularly valuable? No. I guess, and other forms, so is it R? I don't know. I am not a grammar person. It should be R. Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, it's because it's representation and assistance.
And assistance. Got it. Thank you. Anything further on that particular line, and then we'll move throughout the rest. Thanks, Russell. I think that's helpful. Jeff had a tweak to line 13. Any reactions to that? So he's changed representation here to assistance, the broader category, which I think makes sense. Okay. And then anything further on this paragraph? It is lines 6 through 15. Yeah, 15. Okay. Let's move to the third paragraph. We don't have any comments in third or fourth paragraphs. Would anybody have any thoughts on those two paragraphs? Any reactions, changes? And again, this language tracks the title as revised, I think, right? Without I'm seeing on line 17 and line 19, without representation or assistance, without representation or assistance. Line 22, access representation or other forms of assistance. Line 23. Renee. Hi, Renee. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I was late. It's not really line 23. But it's line 24. Were you going to get there eventually?
Yes, we can do line 24, please.
That sentence begins, this is, perhaps it could say, this concern is particularly acute in remote and rural areas.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that change? Thanks, Renee. Anything further on these two paragraphs? This is, can you scroll back up, Leah? 16, it's 16 through 23, so 26. I guess not to go back to the title again, but would the idea be that we would change these references to flip, or we could stick with representation and other forms of assistance, even though the title says non-lawyer assistance and representation? I just put that out there. We'll come back to it. Okay. If there's nothing further on 16 through 26, we'll move to the next paragraph, 27 through 33. Yeah, there we go. Renee, I see your hand up, but I don't know if you're still from last time. Okay, great. No worries.
Right.
Anything on this paragraph? Okay. Next paragraph, lines 34 through, wow, 46. We have an edit from Jeff in line 45. But anything in that paragraph, any reaction to Jeff's edit? This is where we lay out the two concepts of representation and assistance. Adam, welcome.
Hi. I don't think this idea will be well received, and I'm skeptical myself, but just going to this difference between assistance and representation. And Nadine, as you said here, we kind of say that assistance includes representation. I mean, could have the title simply say non-lawyer assistance in agency adjudications. I mean, because it would capture representation. I think maybe the problem with that is, despite assistance including representation, I think we all probably tend to think of representation being something more than just mere assistance. And maybe that's why it makes sense to keep it in the title. But I was going to say that earlier, but just kind of held off. But now, since we keep circling back to the idea of maybe changing the title or playing around with the title, I just wanted to throw that idea out there. And again, I think it is kind of consistent with at least, how the terms have been defined in the document.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's an interesting thought, particularly given how this is drafted in this paragraph. Russell, I don't know if Russell's still with us, but if Russell had a reaction to that, since he flagged the title change. Or Nina. Or anyone else. Leah, could we go back up and put that in as a possible? So it would be non-lawyer assistance in agency adjudication. Did I get that right, Adam?
Yeah.
Any reaction to seeing it in black and white there?
Oh, I'm sorry, it should be agency adjudications.
Thank you. All right, we'll let that marinate a little bit. Amy, yeah. Amy, if you'd like to weigh in, that would be great.
I just wanted to say that in my interviews I think this is an area where there's lots of confusion and blurring. And so I just wonder, I know that we're defining assistance as including representation, but I feel like there is a different valence to those two things. And I would I would worry that dropping representation entirely might change the overall, I don't know, the overall expansion and opportunities that might be born from the report and the recommendations.
Thank you.
I mean, for example, I talked to ALJs and different stakeholders who said things like, well, assistance is one thing, but representation is a whole nother thing, right? So I kind of do think that there are two, one is a subset of the other, or one includes the other, but people have different reactions to the different words.
Thank you. Is it, Leah, could we go to, where's the paragraph where we lay out what each concept means? Yeah, there it is. Thank you. Is it inaccurate then to say assistance is broader and includes representation, or if it's viewed in the practical sense as different concepts? Amy, did you want to speak to that?
I mean, I think one of the problems is that we don't really know, we don't have a real set definition of what it means to represent someone, right? I mean, the unauthorized practice of law statutes are also very vague on this. I don't know that we, I'm not sure how assistance includes representation as it's defined here, because assistance seemed to me up to the point of the hearing, things that happen pre-hearing or on the side or temporarily before, just something like that. Whereas representation is someone who's standing there on behalf, representing someone at a hearing before a decision maker. And although it does assist someone to be represented, it feels as if it's a different thing.
Might be inaccurate to say on line 43, including representation. Would it be best to say apart from, or separate from, or in addition to?
I looked back in the report, and the definition of assistance is similar, but then it has another sentence saying this work does not extend to preparing for or accompanying someone to a hearing or counseling on specific applicability. So it's a much more narrow definition in the report.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. Renee?
I'm not quite sure exactly what line we're talking about, but and this might be a committee on style issue, but these really long lists of things that are in the text, like from 34 to 39, where there's this whole big long list of different categories of people who might provide assistance. I don't know. I mean, I think it might be easier to read if it were kind of bullet points or something, but like I said, that's a committee on style issue perhaps, but I just make that comment because your eyes kind of glaze over going through the list.
Mm-hmm. We can flag that for committee on style. Thank you. Nicole, welcome.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I can't turn my camera on. I am on a computer that doesn't have a video camera right now, which is kind of wild in 2024. But I based on this conversation, it seems to make sense to me to take out including representation under assistance. Personally, like I've always thought of them as two different things, and based on what Amy said, it seems like assistance is actually different from representation. Like you said, it's up to the point of a hearing and things that maybe surround a hearing, but not the hearing itself. And given that, I do have to agree that the title, not to go back to the title, it seems like maybe that's something that we should discuss at the end, but just since I'm talking about it, like it should probably be representation and assistance. I get the point of temporally assistance comes first, but as far as I can tell, this document is mostly geared towards a discussion on representation. And if you're trying to make the entire document based on the timeline of a person's experience with the system, it seems to me you'd have to rearrange a pretty significant portion, which is probably not necessary, because it seems to flow relatively well, aside from, the few things that we're talking about. So to me, it makes the most sense to take out including representation here at line 43, and then to make the title representation and assistance.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? Comments, reactions? Anything further on this paragraph? Nicole, if I could just trouble you, I think we are going to keep bouncing back to the title. So you would be in favor of Russell's suggestion, which was representation and assistance instead of assistance and representation?
Yes.
Okay. So the Adam suggestion without the representation, I think you had concerns about leaving that out.
Yes, I did.
Thank you. Okay. All right. I think we'll leave those there to marinate a little more and then come back to it. Okay, so paragraph lines 34 through 46. Anything further on that? This is where we're laying out these concepts. Adam.
Do we need to make any other like conforming changes in the paragraph? Like, for example, on line 41, the reference to other forms of assistance that likely indicate representation would be maybe easier to simply say activities that it likely indicate representation include counseling on specific things like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
You read my mind, Adam. I was looking at that as well.
And then on line 43, assistance is broad use to indicate all forms of help. Should that maybe be I don't know, something like indicate many other forms of help? So it's not quite as all inclusive, but still like a pretty broad concept.
Mm-hmm.
Many other forms, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Leah, on line 41 to 42, that likely indicate representation. You can get rid of include, I think. No, wait. Oh no, include and get rid of such activities. There we go. Yeah, sorry. I'm slow on this. Yep. Thank you, Adam.
And I was and maybe it should say other activities since it's since the preceding sentence seems like it just kind of like generally standing in someone's shoes is the main, maybe the principal form of representation we think about.
Mm-hmm. Any reactions to these changes here? I think this is helpful. We have an edit here from Jeff at the end, helping someone navigate a form or benefits application. Any objection to that? Okay, let's move to the next paragraph then. 47 to 58. Okay. Next paragraph. 59 through 66. This is where we talk about, oh, Nicole, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think it was in the paragraph above as well,
Yep.
but it doesn't really matter that much, but it says non-lawyer representation and other assistance. Just based on the conversation we've just had, shouldn't it just be representation and assistance?
Is this line 47?
On line 47, it says increasing availability of non-lawyer representation and other forms of assistance.
Mm.
I think based on the conversation we just had, it should just say representation and assistance. Though again, I don't know if it's like a huge deal.
No, I hear you. We want consistency. And I think maybe we have it in line 55 as well.
Yeah, we can go through after if the committee agrees that it should be representation and assistance throughout committee on style. We can do that after the meeting. Take it
Great.
Thank you. But thank you for flagging it, Nicole. That's helpful.
Yeah, no problem.
Anything further? Change everywhere. I like that, Leah. It's good. Okay. So these no, we're not on the last two paragraphs. Oh, no, we are on the last two paragraphs of the preamble. Give it some time for people to read. Can I ask, and I don't know if this is a Jeremy question, line 67, we referenced the 1986 recommendation. Did it say non-lawyer representation and assistance? What order did it appear in? If that gives us any help.
Non-lawyer assistance and representation. So the title of this recommendation was taken directly from the old recommendation.
I think assistance was first, no?
It was.
Okay. But in 86, it's second.
Yeah, the title of the 86 recommendation was non-lawyer assistance and representation. I think it's
Got it.
footnote
Okay.
8.
But here, okay. The text in 67 to 68
Yeah.
flipped it. Got it. All right. Sorry. Again, I'm slow to, I don't know what it is. No caffeine, maybe. Okay. Anything on this last paragraph? Okay. We made short work of the preamble, but we still can't figure out the title of this thing. Let's get to the recommendation. Maybe that'll help us or not. Okay. So the first recommendation, we don't have any comments from either Jeff or Russell, but obviously if anybody has anything they want to propose here or discuss, let's do it now. The first recommendation. Okay, we'll go to the second, and we have a suggestion here from Russell. I don't know if Russell wants to speak to his suggestion here.
Just, again, none of these are, as I said before, profound, but just to make clear, we're informing the participants, we're not informing potential representatives. So just make that clear, that's all. Unless providing information as a general information provision to would-be representatives as well as participants. I don't think that's what it means, but it could imply that. Changing it as I've written, I think makes it clear who should get the information.
No, I think the context is what you're saying. I think this is a good change. Any reaction to this change? Great, thank you, Russell. I think we're good. All right, we might hit a snag here on recommendation 3, where we say other forms of assistance, and I'm not sure how unless we would just say here, agencies should generally permit assistance. Nina,
I may be really beating a dead horse about this, but
right?
my lifetime of experience is that people need assistance before they need representation. And that if they don't get the assistance, they will never attempt to get representation because the whole process is overwhelming for them and they will give up. And therefore, I really think that the organization of these sections should start with assistance. So 3 should be number 1 in this section. And assistance should come before representation in the title. It's not just to do a timeline chronological, it's to do what individuals facing agency action need. They need assistance first before they can even determine whether they need representation.
So your suggestion would be to move 3 all the way up to the top
Yes,
as the
absolutely.
first. Okay.
Yes,
8.
and I would take that lens throughout all the other sections of this report. Some of the sections talk specifically about representation, and my comment would be immaterial, but looking at, if there are other sections that are talking about assistance and representation, I would reorder it. So assistance is the first recommendation in each section.
Thank you, Amy.
So I agree with that in part, but what I wanted to point out is I think 3 is actually referring to something else. I don't know, but I think 3 references the parts of the report that talk about representation by family members being kind of situations where a family member was kind of doing that familial pro se kind of representation, and ALJs or hearing officers say, this isn't representation. You can be a witness, but you can't represent. So I think that 3 is referencing actual representation as opposed to assistance. So Nina's comment kind of notwithstanding the restructuring on that front, I think that 3 goes to something slightly different, but I could be wrong.
So we should clarify that agencies should generally permit.
Yeah,
The
if
report
there's language.
demonstrates, situations where representation by friends, family members, or other individuals was not considered representation, was kind of discouraged. And I think that this recommendation is speaking to that situation.
So would it be inaccurate to say that they should permit friends, family members, or other individuals to represent them?
I think so, but maybe Leah or Matt could weigh in. I think that that's what this recommendation is referring to.
So this was actually just referring to assistance generally, not representation, because then what we were thinking is assistance does not require necessarily qualifications or accreditation from an agency, right? We don't want agencies limiting assistance from friends, family members, things like that because of qualifications. We would, and again, this is not up to us, obviously, but we would want, the way we drafted this would be to have non-lawyers representing to be subject to qualifications, whereas assistance would not be, if that makes sense.
So that's why if that's the case, then I would put
Move it
3
on.
as number 1.
Russell.
I wonder if we really just have a bigger terminology problem here. Assistance, in one sense, is all encompassing. It embraces everything from standing in the shoes, as the report says, to being available to, pardon the expression, to hold a hand of someone who's in a difficult situation. And then we have something then there's a more specific reference, the latter one, which is non-representational, but it's other kinds of sort of personal help and hand-holding, again, pardon the expression, and whether or not we just that term assistance is being asked to do too much work. It's on the one hand, it embraces everything, and on the other hand, it's not incidental to representation, but it's secondary in a sense. You could say representation and other forms of non-representation and non-representational assistance. I mean, I hate to say that because it could mean a lot of rewriting, but maybe that's what we're all stuck on. Because I certainly see the point that in one sense, assistance is the topic of the report, non-lawyers helping people get through the proceeding, everything from representation to everything else. On the other hand, assistance, I rate it mostly as having that more specific meaning.
Any reaction to that? I think you raise an interesting point here, Russell, about just general terminology, how we're using these words. No reaction. Okay, well, I think Nina's suggestion is to move 3 up, and you have that. Okay. And then I guess the idea, Russell, would be whether or not this should generally permit assistance. I think you said non-representational assistance. Was that what it was?
The term that popped into my head. If the group were to decide, and I'm just suggesting it, were to decide that you have to find another word for the different kind, that secondary kind of assistance, then 3 should stay as it is. If instead we're going to recognize assistance quite clearly as being all encompassing, then I can see why it should move up. But
yeah, go ahead, Russell. Didn't mean to cut you off. Okay, Amy.
The reason I thought we were referring to representation by family members is because the second part of that clause says, unless there's reason to exclude from a proceeding, right? So I think that this particular recommendation is talking about standing in the shoes representation, because your person is in the proceeding physically.
They might be there in their personal capacity, right? Not necessarily as a representative. Like the hand, I know, Russell, the hand holding kind of piece of it, I hate to keep saying that, but as opposed to the standing in the shoes.
Yes, that's what our intent was, in terms of somebody being in a room for moral support during a hearing or during a interview or something like that.
You could just say, I mean, yeah. Go ahead, Amy.
So I guess my question then is, what of the situation where somebody is actually there? The interviews that I held, there were lots of situations where somebody was there. It wasn't clear whether they were there for moral support or representation, and the decision maker automatically defaulted to they're just here for moral support, and kind of the default was that they couldn't possibly represent, even in situations where someone could have a representative of their choosing and they had chosen their family member or whoever. So I thought that's what this recommendation was going to. I think there's a finer point in there.
Nicole?
Yeah, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but if the point of paragraph number 3 is to is to permit friends and family members who are there for moral support, why not just take out the term assistance? Like, why not just say agencies should generally permit
Friends, family members.
like friends, family members. You could even literally use the term moral support. Like, I agree that we're getting caught up on the word assistance. And if the point of paragraph number 3 is not to be about assistance in the sense that we've been talking about it thus far, and only to be about the person who's defending or whatever in the adjudication having like someone there to like just so they're not alone, why do we need the word assistance at all? You know what I mean?
Would it be more specific to say, should generally permit friends, family members, or other individuals to
You could say just to like
Present.
accompany them to the adjudication or something like that. I don't know.
be present during
Yeah,
during the
something like that.
proceeding? And then it would be to exclude such an individual from the proceeding. Or maybe it should be to be present during a proceeding.
Put an example in there, for example, to provide moral support.
Any reaction to this revision? So this is a very narrow, I think it's narrow. I think that's what we intended here for it to be narrow. And if that's the case, I'm not sure. Does it make sense to still move it up? If we're only. Nicole.
I would personally say no, it probably makes sense where it is if we're talking just about people being there for moral support, but that's just my general sense.
Do we need to say, for example, to provide participants with moral support? I think that's the term we're using throughout, participants. Oh, Matt, help us.
I would just say that as rewritten now, it is sort of moved away from what Leah described earlier, that what this was intended to capture was that we want agencies to allow and or not prevent people from getting help from whoever is able to help them, whether or not they meet the agency's qualification requirements under the APA to be a representative. Or an accredited representative for the programs that have those issues. I think if we want to, create more of what Amy's talking about, a position for people to provide moral support or be treated as representatives, even in an informal sense during hearings, then we might still need another recommendation to capture what Nina was talking about the more assistance that you would do at a frontline level of adjudication before you even need representation. So that's something to think about there. The one thing I'll mention with what Amy was talking about is I think we saw in a lot of our interviews are just a real sort of blurriness as to what is considered representation versus other forms of assistance, which is why we tried to be very prescriptive about it in the preamble, and maybe that's doing us a disservice here, and there might be another way to come at this to cause fewer roadblocks. But I would say if that's a problem, then we should maybe think about more broadly whether we like how we want to handle that, and then we can restructure recommendations or preambles to address that sort of blurriness in the prospect. I don't know if Amy agrees with that, but that was sort of my take on it. Hope that helps.
It's nodding. I think that's a good sign. Nina.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to second what Matt said about that. Maybe the solution to this is to just have a separate recommendation about assistance and have that before this particular section to make clear that agencies should enable folks to get assistance before you even get to the point of representation.
So that would be, Leah, if we go up, I think
You would
the
have to
heading,
go above number one, and you know, you could add it here as the number one under this availability of non-lawyer representation and assistance. If you wanted to, you could create availability of non-lawyer assistance and have a recommendation, then availability of non-lawyer representation and have 2, 3, 4 under that.
I actually think that makes good sense if we separate them out. I think that's part of our problem here is we're getting tangled up in how each of them. So if we, maybe if we can deal with them in separate headings, that might be helpful.
And then that lets 3 be able to address inner representation. You should still be able to have these other individuals there to provide moral support.
We have any thoughts in mind here that we want to capture under this heading then? This idea of non-lawyer assistance that we think is separate. Is this where we want to talk more about the lead up, kind of the early stage that I think Nina was talking about?
Mhm.
I don't know that we can draft them up here on the fly, but if there are concepts we would like to be considered in a revision here, this is the time to speak up. Nicole.
Yeah, if it's my understanding, if I'm understanding correctly, that recommendation generally is that for a representation, there's a level of like accreditation that is required that might not be required for assistance prior to representation. So I think, I don't know what the wording would be, but that is my impression is that that's the most important thing to capture under the assistance heading, which is that whoever is assisting the participant doesn't need to have that kind of accreditation that's required for representing them actually at a hearing. Which, like you said, that might not be something we can draft on the fly, but that's what my impression is of what's the most important distinction.
It's great, Leah. Okay, that's good. It's a good starting point.
If that captures the intent, then we can take it back and committee on style it for the next meeting.
Well, I think, I mean, so there's two things to tease out here that I'm seeing, and people please chime in. So assist participants in adjudications, it's a very broad kind of concept. So what I've heard from people is there's this kind of like early stage assistance, and then whether we want at later stage where we might be in a hearing to allow assistance there as well. That's not a representative that's subject to qualifications or accreditation. So is there almost two aspects here of adjudication that we're talking about? Does this capture that? If we just say permit non-lawyers to assist participants in adjudications, period. Do we need to tease out a little bit what we mean that it's early, it can be early stage, it can be at any point throughout an adjudication or something like that? Any thoughts on that? We can have a heading with one recommendation, right? Jeremy? I guess we can.
You
Sure.
could also,
Cole?
sorry, I forgot to raise my hand, but you could also move the friends and family members who are there for moral support up to the assistance section, just if you want to have two things under it. I don't know that it matters.
That was
where it
Nina's
goes.
thought, was that it should be in the lead anyway, so yeah, let's just move that up there for now, I guess. And we can, Any other thoughts of what we should pack in here or tease out on the assistance aspect?
I can get my hand up, but
Yeah, Russell, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I really don't think you want to say regardless of qualifications. I mean, I just don't think you have to say anything. Because you do want to impose qualifications on people who actually, to use the term, stand in the shoes.
I think this section is just going to be about assistance that's not representational, which is what you've been saying, which is this non-representational assistance, right?
I thought it was a more general reference, just a general principle that lawyers should be able to provide assistance broadly defined, and then you get into the specifics of what that means. It includes representation, in which case you do drill down and the agencies are going to impose some qualifications. I mean, regardless of qualifications, it just almost sounds like anything goes. And I don't think it's necessary, because you can explain later where qualifications are required and where they aren't.
So perhaps the first recommendation should just be as simple as saying, should permit non-lawyers to assist participants
That was my
in adjudications. Okay, so so it's basically at any point throughout a process, throughout an adjudication.
Yeah, yeah, and it's implied that some of these things you're gonna up the requirements, but as a general principle, non-lawyers can help participants in adjudication. Period.
Okay.
That's the general principle. That's the whole thrust of the report, and it's stating the obvious in many ways.
And then currently recommendation 2. How does that fit in terms of, is the idea is that this may include friends, family members, or other individuals?
So Nadine, you're saying continue 1, and it could
Yeah.
say this may, okay, I got you.
Yeah. And then I don't know about the rest of it, but I think we're also thinking here about more than just moral support, right? We're thinking about, but I guess it says this may include, so it's just a subset.
Well, I think you're thinking of everything from at the very start saying, you really ought to look into getting somebody to help you with this who knows a way around the hearing room, to, going along and carrying the file of materials that somebody may want to go through, to providing moral support. It includes a whole sorts of things, but presumably all the agencies concerned about what happens in the hearing room as opposed to what happens at home.
Renee.
Could we say something instead of this may include, because I'm not sure what this means. So such participants may include, or something like that.
Well, I think the participants are the people who are coming
Oh, I see.
before.
No, never mind. All right. So
Yeah.
then such assistance. Yeah, that's good. I was having trouble figuring out which was which there. Okay.
So do we mean such assistants or do we mean the non-lawyers? I think that's why I said this may include us being vague.
Right.
I think this is a start. I don't know if there's anything else we need to add to this. I mean, we're talking about contemplating whether a family member could also be a representative, right? But that would be in the next section, because this is just about assistance in a very general sense. Okay. Any other concepts we want to capture under this heading of availability of non-lawyer assistance before we move to representation, which is the next heading? So we're trying to separate these concepts out. And I think Russell's point is well said, that we're trying to capture representation as meaning kind of a level up that's going to require some qualifications or accreditation. Amy.
So I don't want to speak for the committee at all, but the other thing in the report that might be at play here, and this is for everyone to decide if they want, is that, you know, you could consider not just agencies should permit, but that agencies should expand or encourage, you know, the programs that that train assistants. So things like the HUD housing counselors and the navigators, you know, those are formalized agency programs to increase assistance beyond just the types of assistance people might have within their social groups. I don't know if that's something you want to put here, but that kind of goes under assistance, the heading of assistance and that pre-hearing non-representational tasks.
Leah, could we just add like a 2 and just put some concepts there? Possibilities of adding, trying to think of the way to. Yeah. That agencies should encourage, I think this is what I heard Amy say, agencies should encourage and expand. I think we can play with that language if opportunities or possibilities for, yeah. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? Anything further to add? Nicole likes it. Great, thank you. Anything further to add under assistance? Okay, let's move to representation.
Do you want to just
Oh, Leah,
address
yeah.
Jeff's
Yeah.
comment or question here?
I don't even remember what it was.
Asking about exclusions more generally, I guess.
He's not here to enlighten us. Yeah, I'm not sure. Amy, sure, chime in.
I feel like I'm chiming in too much, but he might be alluding here to, you know, when you're not a representative, you're just assisting someone. There are some hurdles built into the system. You can't necessarily help access files. You can't necessarily, I mean, he may be thinking along those lines. I don't want to speak for him, but those would be like pre-hearing exclusions that come to mind.
I wasn't quite sure what he means here. I mean, obviously exclusion from a proceeding if they're disrupting things versus, I don't know if he means, yeah, I'm not sure what he means. Matt, oh, please. Yeah.
And that's funny because I read it more as saying whether or not somebody should be excluded from just the proceeding in which he or she's causing a disruption, or whether
That's how I read it.
excluded for helping people before the agency ever, or
Mhm.
or for future ones, which I think would be counter to the report. I think Amy could speak to that better than me, where I think you would, if somebody is causing a problem today, you might not want to say they can never help ever in the future again.
Yeah.
But we might want to wait for Jeff or
Okay.
ask him.
I think we'll do that. That's how I read it as well, that it was some sort of, you've acted up here, and so we don't want to see you again in any other context. Okay. Anything further under assistance? Last call, and then we'll get, well, not last call for today. And then we'll move on to representation. Okay, let's look at now. So we've got now a category for non-lawyer assistance, and now this is non-lawyer representation. And here we're talking about qualifications and accreditation in the first, well, this is now 3. And then the second recommend, which is now 4, right? It's now 4. This is where we talked about Russell's change, which was, you got to tell people about this opportunity that they can have qualified accredited non-lawyers. Anything further to change on these 2 or consider? Nicole.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is I know there was like concern about whether family members are allowed to be non-lawyer representatives. To me, like the implication is as long as it doesn't say they're not allowed, then they are allowed. But given the concern, you could add something that's like, as assuming family members meet the required qualifications, then agency should allow them to act as non-lawyer representatives or something like that. If the concern is that there's a chance family members, but just by virtue of being family members, will be excluded from that possibility. But like I said, to me, it just seems like the logical conclusion is that if it doesn't say they're not allowed, then they are. But if that's the concern, you could add it in.
Yeah, I read it that way, that it doesn't say they're not able to. So like, for instance, the third recommendation, establish rules authorizing qualified or accredited non-lawyer representatives to practice before them. You could add there, including family members, or which may include family members or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know that it's totally necessary, but like I said, it seemed like that was a concern, that family members had been not allowed to represent, or that there was confusion about if they were. So I just thought if that was a concern, it might be worth it to add.
Any thoughts on that? Nina.
I think one of the concerns about family members representing is if there are potential conflicts, that there's undue influence or something like that involved. And so maybe, just like we've had language about unless otherwise excluded, maybe you're saying something about unless, I don't know how to say this, but some appearance of conflict or something like that, conflict of interest.
You're making me wonder if it's better left not said. That we just leave it as non-lawyer representatives, and we're
Yeah.
not saying who that could be at all.
Right.
Okay. Nicole is, okay, great. Anything else on these two that we need to think about? So there's a comment here from Russell. Is it still relevant? Related to the one we moved up?
It's moved now.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move to the next section. Oh, sorry, I didn't see Jeff's. We talked about that. Yeah, great. We moved it up. Great. Okay. So now we're going to get into the qualifications section for representation. And we have a comment here from Russell on what is now 5B. Russell, would you like to speak to this?
I just, as I said, I was confused. I have in mind two kinds of knowledge, general knowledge of a field, and then knowledge about the specific adjudication. I mean, I have some familiarity with immigration law, but I don't know too much about asylum, for example. But these terms, relevant subject matter of the adjudication, I take it those are two different things. I guess they're two different things, are they? Or not? Or are these just different references to subject matter? Basically, references to being familiar with the area of administrative law at issue in the adjudication. I just found those terms confusing. And if it's just me, let it go. But if others saw it, maybe it ought to be clarified. Is relevant subject matter the same as subject matter of the adjudication?
Yep.
So is that two
Fair
terms
question.
describing the same thing or not? In other words, B talks about knowledge of the relevant subject matter. C talks about experience relating to the subject matter of the adjudication.
Should either be consistent or we should make clear what the differences are.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Are they different? I guess that's really a question for the authors or for the author of the report
Mhm.
or somebody. Or am I just picking a nit here for no good reason?
I will say that these factors came pretty much verbatim from the Office of the Chair project, the model rules of representative conduct that were just published. This is what that working group came up with and what was adopted. It doesn't mean we have to adopt that same language here. But to Russell's point, I think E would get at general knowledge of adjudication, whereas my understanding is that relevant subject matter or subject matter of the adjudication would mean the same thing, like relevant to that type of adjudication, not just where E would be adjudication, maybe more generally.
So we could use the same terminology. I hear what you're saying is that the model rules use this different language for each, but maybe meaning the same thing.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay.
But yes, this language did come from the model rules, which again, we are not required to use, but that's where it came from.
Russell, do you have a preference for which one you like better?
No, I don't have a preference for what I like the better. If they mean the same thing, I think it ought to be the same terminology throughout. That's all.
Yeah.
And I think relevant subject matter is shorter, so it seems to, shorter is better than longer if possible. But I want to make sure I'm not skipping over something here and looking over distinctions that really are there.
So for instance, then in C, we would just say relating to the relevant subject matter.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
Relevant subject matter sounds, it's something different than subject matter of the adjudication, which could be a very fine point. Whether clause B, section B1 means, one thing or the other. Relevant subject matter could be, I understand generally the area we're dealing with here. I think we're talking about the latter, but then we just should make it clear by using the same terminology.
So now in D, we say has passed an exam or professional license. Relevant to the subject matter of the adjudication, okay. Or just maybe we just say relating to the relevant subject matter.
If that's accurate, I think that's better.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Russell. I think we've got oh, Nicole, sorry. I see a hand.
No, that's okay. This is actually regarding letter E. Sorry, so it kind of worked out. But I have a question first and then possibly a comment. So for E, did you say that the intent is that they take into account the expertise or skills in relation to their like ability to adjudicate generally? Okay, then not to be like absolutely so extremely nitpicky, but I think you have to take out the word the. Because if you say the adjudication, it implies you're talking about the specific adjudication at issue as opposed to their ability to adjudicate generally.
That's good.
Thank you. My English teachers hated me.
This is great. Okay. Anything else here on these changes or any up through H? I think we have a comment from Jeff. Again, is this similar? This is similar to what he said above. Past cases are ongoing. Okay, this is about, okay, so this adds some context to his other comment about what he was focused on in terms of exclusions, right? Exclusion from a proceeding. Well, the exclusions we were talking about above were for assistance, right? And so this would be for representatives and whether we would want. I mean, in some ways, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way, that we'd be maybe more lenient with assistance in terms of family members or, there for moral support versus, we take it case by case versus someone who's going to be a non-lawyer rep who has certain qualifications and expectations for conduct. So perhaps we may want to think about whether there would be some sort of future bar. But I don't know if how it's worded makes it sound like it would be one time versus for all time. We can leave it. Obviously Jeff isn't here to really explain. Okay, let's move to 6. And then are there two comments here? From Russell and from Jeff. So it sounds like they had some similar concerns here. Russell, would you like to speak to this?
Most jurisdictions allow people who are disbarred to be reinstated. So if you say who is disbarred, I mean, you're talking about somebody who is currently barred from practicing law. Has been disbarred could be somebody who got disbarred 20 years ago and got reinstated 10 years ago. And I presume that they should be able to represent, but unless the authors meant that once disbarred, no matter whether you're reinstated or not, you can't represent. I don't think that's what they mean, but if they do, then has been is all right.
Amy.
This comes from the report and it's how Russell is seeing it is correct, is if they're actively disbarred.
I think this change would be consistent with the report. What was Jeff's comment? Let's see, should this be forever? Could they be rehabilitated? Well, I guess if they're reinstated.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're good. Matt,
If they're reinstated, then they're not a non-lawyer representative, they're a lawyer representative. So I think the situation you're probably more reaching at is somebody who is disbarred a long time ago and then gets reinstated and then retires and then wants to practice as a non-lawyer representative. I think Russell's edit still captures that circumstance quite well without having to worry about what Jeff said.
okay. Thanks. So we have accreditation next. I'm wondering if it might be good to take a 10-minute break. We're at 2:43, and then come back and deal with accreditation, because this might have some interesting discussion potential. So let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and tackle that section. So let's start with the first comment from Jeff, who was concerned that some of the recommendations suggesting qualifications and accreditation might create a barrier. And I think Amy touched on this a little bit in her opening remarks. But I'm going to turn it to her to talk a little bit about this and kind of address her findings on this aspect. And obviously, the point of this is to make it easier for agencies to allow non-lawyer representation and assistance, not to make it harder, and not to turn these representatives or assistants into pseudo lawyers, mini lawyers, kind of lawyers. So Amy, if you could just say a few words about that, I think it might help our discussion.
I mean, yeah, over-credentializing is going to be a barrier. But I think that there are ways, and I think the report and the goal of the recommendations are ways to kind of, the word I keep using is calibrate, but kind of, we want to have the right depth or amount of accreditation vis-a-vis the type of tasks that the person will be doing and the type of adjudication the person will be appearing in. And I do just want to say that in some ways, the opposite appeared to be true, that more thoughtful or intentional accreditation might actually encourage more non-lawyer representation. So it's not always a barrier. I think it can be a barrier if it's done kind of with one, broad brush, but the more it can be calibrated and done intentionally, then it can actually encourage and build out more programs for non-lawyer representation.
Thank you. Any thoughts or comments on Jeff's concerns? Nina.
So I can only speak to the area of taxation, but this is where this both fits into specialized or technical subject matter, high volume of cases with underserved communities, and definitely in some aspects, evidentiary hearings. And we have a broad swath of people who are preparing returns, and historically, they were authorized to represent taxpayers in audits of the returns that they prepared, which would almost be a built-in conflict of interest. And these could be any of you in your community. You can see these folks hanging out shingles in dog grooming parlors, in used car dealerships to prepare returns. The IRS has put in some requirements that have said, if you want to represent a taxpayer in audit, you have to have continuing education, and you have to, be on our register, essentially, register with us. And so that has left, people who are still how shall I say, they're non-lawyers and they're able to represent the taxpayers, but they have got to do some level of educational requirements every year. That has allowed them to distinguish themselves from the bad actors in the communities. And so that has been a very positive thing for taxpayers to be able to say, well, are you, do you have some kind of continuing education? I can feel that I can go to you because you've got some competence, as opposed to people who have not taken any of these things. And before that, there was no bright line. There was no way to distinguish. So I actually don't see this as a barrier for people who, in these categories, of agencies, are non-lawyers who want to represent. I think it's actually something that, from a consumer protection perspective, is very positive.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Nina. Any other comments? Okay, great. So let's get started on 7. Let's, I think this is an interesting way to kind of set the stage. So we have the types of agencies who should look at this, and we've got 3 here. We've got a comment from Jeff. I think he's worried about the high bar again. So this is akin to, I think, his other comment. Any other thoughts about this paragraph, this recommendation? And then the explanation of the 3, I think we have a Russell. I'm going to skip over Jeff's concern just to the extent that it relates to what we just talked about. And Amy, you had a comment.
It might address Jeff's concern to say, just because an agency is implementing a formal accreditation program, it doesn't mean it needs to be an extremely detailed, with 3 years of training. I mean, there's a level, there's a range.
Spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah. So that maybe putting language like that in, so it doesn't feel as if we're saying, the recommendation is saying everyone needs like a DOJ accredited rep program that's very, very highly detailed. Yeah. It just means, there's some form of accreditation.
Yeah.
We inserted some language in current number 8 in the second sentence there to address this concern. So I don't know whether it might help Jeff if we broke that out into a separate recommendation, or more general rather than being connected to training and continuing education.
I like that idea. Let's make it a separate one, unless anybody objects. Obviously, I'm not the sole voice here, but I think that it's still there. It's just going to be it's a matter of emphasis. So if anybody has concerns about that, it'll become 9. Okay. Yep. Thank you, Leah. So let's go back up to 7, and we have Russell's concern about the historically underserved communities, and I guess we have another use of special populations and how those might relate or should be the same. If Russell's back with us.
I'm back. No, earlier, I guess in the preface referred to special populations, which I take as a little different from historically underserved communities. If the reference here is back to the earlier reference, I think it should use the same terms. Historically underserved communities has, to me, in my mind, has a sort of special meaning, and areas of cities which get subpar municipal services and things like that. The special populations were, you recall, tribal communities, people with disabilities, criminal records, immigrants, and disaster survivors, which don't always fit into that historically underserved community. So if the goal was to recall the problem elucidated in the preface, I think we should use the same terms. That's all.
Okay. Amy, would that be consistent with the report's concept of this?
Well, I think, what is it, 7 now? 7B is talking about what we call the mass justice adjudications, right? And there, I think it may be more focused on historically underserved communities than the special populations that are, that I think, I was just looking back in the preamble, that might be talking about the role of community and specialized knowledge, but maybe not.
Use both.
I mean, there'll be overlap, right? But not always. It's kind of two different things, as Russell's pointing. But the mass justice definition, I believe the report uses the same definition from the 1984, I think it is the report, that for mass justice agencies, which I can pull up here.
Would it be helpful to see the prior reference on the screen in the preamble to special populations? I have a hard copy, but I don't know if everybody else does.
It was at page 3, line 48, although that's probably changed a little bit anyway.
For what it's worth, the intent was, as Amy described it, to identify in the preamble the special communities with highly specialized knowledge of that community's needs, which we address in a later recommendation further down. I would look back at her report for probably what the intent was here. I think because this recommendation came directly from the report.
So on 21, I'm sorry, Leah, you have it. The 21 and 22, we say members of historically underserved communities, low-income people and members are unable to access representation. I think that's consistent with the report. And then I think it's 47 to 48. Yeah, yeah, right there. Yeah, you got it. I think, do we mean deliberately there's special populations, which I think is what Matt is saying. So if we use both later.
Well, it may not be necessary based on what Matt said.
Okay, right. So we would leave historically underserved communities.
I would think so.
Okay. Okay. Russell, on this one, training and continuing education.
I mean, I spent a lot of time in my previous life with this. I think they probably meant orientation. Training and continuing education, in a lot of people's minds, they're the same thing. I really don't think they are, but I think maybe you want to get it, on the one hand, providing introduction, orientation to these people, and then continuing education after the orientation.
Yeah, I was thinking, like initial training and then continuing to keep you up to date and fresh. So your suggestion would be to replace
What? Just say orientation. And
orientation.
continuing
Okay.
education.
Yep. And get rid of training.
Get rid of training. It always offends me anyway. You train dogs. I don't think you train people.
Adam.
Hi, sorry to return back to what we were just talking about with part B and B of
Okay.
number 7, but it just doesn't it doesn't seem as kind of self-evident to me as A and C in terms of why there is a need for accreditation with respect to historically underserved communities in these high volume cases. And I do wonder, and again, sorry to beat a dead horse on this one, but would it help if the language within B kind of addressed more why it is that there would be a desire or need for accreditation with respect to those cases, such something like agencies that adjudicate a high volume of cases involving communities with specialized needs or specialized challenges, something like that, that kind of is suggestive of why there might be a need for some particular expertise in this area.
So you have language, your proposed language would be involving communities that, I'm sorry, I'm not remember that face.
Communities with specialized, I
Oh,
want to
okay.
say specialized needs comes to mind. And I apologize, I'm probably not getting there's probably a better way to phrase it, but or specialized challenges.
Challenges was what I was thinking, yeah.
I thought maybe that kind of gets more at the kind of the concept we were talking about and why it is that this is an area where there would be a greater need for accreditation.
Oh, so we got, no, I'm sorry. Let's go to Nicole and then I'll let Amy speak to the report piece of this. Nicole.
Yeah, perhaps I misunderstood, but I thought we talked about the term specialized needs and historically underserved populations having different meanings based on the preamble. So I maybe I misunderstood the conversation. I don't know, but if I am understanding correctly, I have concern. I don't know that we should use the word specialized needs or challenges because the terms are used differently. And also, just sort of aside from that, my understanding generally is that one of the reasons to ensure there's accreditation for historically underserved communities is that those are the communities that often get taken advantage of, which is different than a group of people who has a specialized like challenge in terms of their adjudication.
Or you wouldn't put this language in. I mean, the earlier language is special populations. I think that's what we have in the earlier language.
Oh, okay. I probably still wouldn't use it because I think it's different, but it seems like Amy has thoughts, so I'll stop talking.
Yeah, no, we're gonna think this all through. Amy.
So there's two different things going on here. The accreditation, the 7B, really is highlighting these mass justice agencies, particularly because there's such high volume and such low rates of representation. That's why this is an area that's being and tend to involve historically underserved communities in these adjudications, whereas the other reference earlier in the preamble was really talking about the role of community trust and community expertise that, veterans have about veterans issues, or a tribal member might have about a tribal probate case. Like that's a different kind of consideration entirely from here. I wouldn't want to conflate them. I think 7B is really just trying to get to your large mass justice programs that historically have very low representation rates and, involve lots and lots of volume, and a lot of that volume falling into historically underserved communities.
Adam.
Then why is it, and sorry if I'm not following them, why is it, if it's high volume with low representation rates, why then is there a need for accreditation? That seems counterintuitive to me. Like it seems like that would be in an area where you wouldn't want to kind of erect any type of barrier to representation.
I think because with the high volume, there's a huge, for lack of a better word, kind of profit motive for bad actors. Right? There's a huge incentive there. And so accreditation can help, to Nicole's point, can help keep a handle on that.
Okay.
I would just also add to Amy's point that since there are a high volume of cases, low representation, it tends to be the same representatives. So this can actually help reduce burdens on requiring a decision maker to qualify the same representative over and over in each proceeding, whereas it's pretty much the same people. They do this for a living, and so have a formal accreditation program where it's like a one and done almost.
Any further thoughts on whether we should include with specialized challenges? I actually wondered if, I think Amy, you said with historically low representation rates or something like that. I wondered if it was valuable to add that. I mean, I don't know that we could say it about the other two types, but if it's a feature of this.
So from the
particular-
report, the language is characterized by very high volume and low representation rate. If that's useful. That's how mass justice adjudications are characterized in the report.
What if you added it at the end? Or no, maybe not. Nicole.
Yeah, I don't want to like be too nitpicky again, but I don't necessarily know that I would include with this low representation rates. I think that just saying agencies that adjudicate a high volume of cases involving historically underserved communities and then stop is good, because the historically underserved communities generally have low representation rates. That's just like a fact, right? So it's first of all, it's kind of redundant. Second of all, it is possible that there would be historically underserved communities that don't have low representation rates, but I would still want to include those as part of the group that needs accreditation, because whether or not they have low representation rates doesn't affect or doesn't necessarily change whether or not they are more likely to get taken advantage of, which is one of the points of the accreditation. So I think if you say with low representation rates, intentionally or not, you exclude historically underserved communities that for whatever reason don't have those low representation rates, but who still might be targets of people who are of like, profiteering, like Amy was saying. So my impression is that just keeping it the way that it was without any changes, not to make this whole conversation irrelevant, but that's my impression of the best language.
Oh, that's great. David, welcome.
Hi, yeah, I tend to agree there, but I wanted to ask about the language in 8 when you guys are ready to go back to that.
Great. Anything further? Okay, I think we're done with 7. Let's go to 8. David, you're on.
So the orientation seems like the wrong word choice if what we're talking about is providing, and I hate to say the word training since it apparently is something we do just for dogs, but like training seems to be the right thing. We're trying to provide an education for somebody who may not have that. Orientation strikes me more like a term that, here's where the bathrooms are, here's where the kitchen is. And they're two very different things, especially if we're to then turn around and say, and continuing education, which implies that we're talking about educating somebody as opposed to orienting somebody. At least that's my view of it.
I had thought initial training might be a way to kind of get at that. I don't know how you feel about that language.
I think that makes sense. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially in the context of what VA does as it relates to its accreditation program.
Where's Russell? Any reaction to that?
I'll go with the flow. I mean, I prefer the other, but I said orientation that's what we do for new federal judges. We have orientation seminars, and we don't go over where the bathroom is. We go over other stuff, but that's fine.
Any other reactions?
I think we spent enough time on it. Let's just keep it like it is, initial training.
Got it. Okay. If there's nothing further on 8, we can move to 9. And 9 was our new one that we created. I forgot. Yep. So we have training again here. I don't know if that's, do we want to say educating? To encompass both the initial training and the continuing ed? What if we say educating? Nicole likes it. Okay. All right. Before we jump to oversight, I did want to flag Matt. Let me know that Lou Varelli is here, and Lou worked on the model rules project, and we had questions about, I think, the qualifications section, was it? That list came out of the model rules, and I hate to put Lou on the spot, but if he's here and available, we tweaked the language from the model rules based on our understanding that we were meaning the same thing. But if you have any insight on why certain, I can point you to the language if you're here, Lou.
I am. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm late. I was teaching until 3 o'clock.
Yeah, all the better for those students. So we had looked at this list that I understand came from the model rules, and there was a question about the use of relevant subject matter versus subject matter of the adjudication, and whether that meant different things. And we decided it meant the same thing, so we've changed the language to say relevant subject matter throughout. And if that comes to mind for you at all, or you have any insight, I thought I'd give you the chance to share it with the group. If there is no recollection, if you have blocked that experience out of your mind,
Well,
that's
what I am
fine too.
what I am certain of is at some point in our process, it looked like it does now in yours, and then it went back. So the word relevant came in and out of all of those
Okay,
several times.
okay.
And I don't remember exactly what the model rules say right sitting here, but so to read this, you relevant was added here and of the adjudication was taken out, and the opposite is true in the model rules. Is that right?
Yeah, it's used, both phrases are used, relevant
Yeah.
subject matter and subject matter of the adjudication. And so we picked one and we're using it throughout, which is relevant subject matter.
So I think what we did is I didn't use relating to and relevant in the same line. So I think that's why. So relating to was in lieu of relevant in that one, and in B, relating to didn't make the cut and it ended up being relevant. And
That's helpful.
I'm willing to claim a more profound reason for that. I don't remember what it was though. But I'm confident about that because I had all sorts of markups on this page going back and forth between relevant and related to, trying to figure out which one we preferred. I don't think it's earth-shattering either way, but I didn't like
using both, relating
yeah,
to
and
the relevant.
I'm not commenting on that here because I haven't been here for the whole conversation, but that was the
Fine.
reason.
That's fine. No, that's helpful. Any reaction to that? Okay, we'll leave it as is. Thank you, Lou. So we will go to oversight and enforcement. Any reactions to 11 or 12? We'll start with the first two. "13, we have a comment from Jeff about whether debarment-like sanctions would be reviewable. Should we say that? Judicially reviewable, I should say. So it currently says that agencies should provide for administrative review of any sanctions. Do we want to make them judicially reviewable?
For what it's worth, after we got Jeff's comment, we did a little research, and SSA does not allow for judicial review of these type of sanctions. They do allow administrative review. Same with, I believe, the VA, but David might be able to say more on that. Yeah, so I think Jeff's comment was presuming that these might be judicially reviewable, but I don't know of any program that is, yeah.
Jeremy.
Yeah, also, I don't know that agencies could unilaterally provide for judicial review of their decisions. So, I mean, I think if you want to get into this, you're talking about some kind of recommendation to Congress.
Well, thank you. Nicole.
I was going to say something sort of similar, which is that I think there's a world in which somebody could sue in a court and say that like this rule is wrong and it should be judicially reviewable. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like maybe it's just like keep it as your administrative review, and if someone has a real problem with it, they'll figure out how to get it in front of a court. And I agree that like probably an agency doesn't have the power to tell a court they have to review their rulings anyways. I think it's the other way around.
Thank you. Any other comment? Okay, well, we're not going to mention it then. And then we have another comment from Jeff. Should this disclosure be allowed or encouraged before any, okay, so here we have a judicial review point, but I'm not sure what he's suggesting here. But any reactions? I mean, I think, I mean, maybe Amy can speak to why we have this in the recommendation to the extent that her report can shed some light on it.
Yeah, I mean, I believe this is just a consumer protection issue that people not be swayed to by representatives that are actually can't do anything.
Got it. Any comments or concerns or thoughts, language? We're not going to allow for judicial review, so maybe the comment is moot. Okay. Anything further? We'll move to coordination and collaboration. I like this part. I like this idea of collaboration. It's great. 15. Are we okay with accreditation or training programs? I think my only question would be whether we want to say education. You know, if education is a broader term and includes the initial training and then the continuing ed, I throw that out there for consideration. No objection. 16. Funding opportunities for nonprofits to help employ, educate. Should we say it? Russell, I'll never look at the word training again the same way. I love dogs, but $17, law schools. Jeff has a comment here. Supervision by clinical professors who are mostly, yeah, they're going to be lawyers. So under the supervision of lawyers, or including.
I think. Sorry, I meant to raise my hand. I forgot. Not to out myself as probably the youngest person in this meeting, but I just graduated last year from law school. I don't think that there's a clinic professor who's not a lawyer. I think I might be redundant. I like because they all clinic students have to practice under a lawyer. They have there has to be a lawyer in the courtroom. So I think it might be redundant, but I'm just throwing that out there.
We're happy that you're here. You're out of law school. We all remember that. Go ahead, Nina.
So in the IRS, certified accountants are authorized to represent taxpayers. And we have a clinical program that provides grants to business and accounting schools so that business and accounting school students can represent taxpayers before the IRS under the supervision of certified public accountants. So I don't know where you fit that in, that as you're trying to encourage non-lawyer representation, you may have other academic programs that aren't law schools that are creating non-lawyer advocates and want to do that at the educational level.
Amy.
I'll just chime in. Nina's absolutely correct. And also we heard from, and in the report, there's mention of like paralegal programs that are doing similar work. So I do think maybe broadening that language to clinics embedded in higher institution, I don't know, higher education, or I don't know how we want to word it, but I don't know that it's limited to law school.
Maybe law and other professional school clinics or something like that.
Let's try that.
Under the supervision of lawyers or other accredited professionals. Agency accredited professionals, something like that.
That's a great start.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole likes it. Anybody else? No, I think this is great. This is so we should say allowing students, not law students. Yep. Anything else? Amy, I see your hand is up, but it might be from before. Okay, good. All right. Anything further on this one? 18. $19. Okay, let's go to data then. We have a comment here from Russell. Russell, would you like to speak to the comment here?
And I.
Wait, I'm going to stop you for 1 second. Renee, did you have something on this one or a prior one?
A prior one.
Okay, sorry, Russell. I'll come back to you.
I'm
Renee.
sorry.
No,
I'm sorry,
that's
I was
fine.
just
No, we got let's
finding
do it.
that mute button. So this last point about bar organizations, I'm just wondering, up where we talk about, cooperating with nonprofit organizations or providing
16.
grant funding. I'm just wondering, should bar associations, this is paragraph 16. I was just wondering about where bar associations fit in because they have a lot of volunteer projects, right? Where they could organize groups of people to, provide assistance, even if they're not really, representing the clients. So I'm just wondering if that fits into any of this anywhere. Other than getting them to, stop, complaining about practice of law. Unauthorized practice of law. I'm hearing silence.
No, I think we're trying to figure out where it might fit. At least that's what I'm doing. I don't know if anybody else is. Thank you, Renee. Nicole.
I don't want to discourage anyone from like helping with representation in these situations, but I just wonder if including bar associations is necessary because this focuses on non-lawyer representatives. And so that implication is that a lawyer can represent someone in these kind of proceedings without having to go through this accreditation program, which would it also imply that if they wanted to, bar associations could help make that happen. I know, like you said, they have a lot of programs where they help connect people with various representation, but I don't know that they're really ever going to focus their energy on non-lawyers. So I just wonder if that's like an unnecessary addition given the focus of this document.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair response.
Is there anything in the report that speaks to this? I think you would have chimed in if it did.
Not to the, there's no examples of bar programs for non-lawyers, no.
Okay.
I'm not saying they categorically do not exist, but they did not come up in the research.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts on that? Adam.
Not on that precise issue, but on 19 on line 168.
Mm-hmm.
Could we add a may have before say, the effect of state prohibitions against unauthorized practice law may have on the ability of non-lawyers to represent parties before them? I just noticed that the report talks in terms of potential effects and possible federal preemption, so just thought it might be helpful to hedge a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any reaction to that? Okay. All right. Let's go to 20 and I'll kick it back to Russell.
I'm very supportive of the basic notion here, but I suggest tweaking the language a little bit more than I may have suggested to make sure that we understand what we're doing. So I would say instead of track data, I would say gather and maintain baseline data. And rather than say to assess whether, it's as if the data are going to do their own assessing. I would say to help agencies and others assess whether. There's, such as ACUS, for example, and scholars working as ACUS consult. We had to say that, but just who I have in mind by others. And then I also, once as I noted, this is where you get into the intricacies of it all, but you're going to gather data on outcomes. And I asked the question, compared to what? Which leads me to maybe say gather and maintain baseline comparative data or something to that effect, just so the paragraph doesn't become a exercise in research design, but it acknowledges that this is not as simple a task as one might think. But I don't want to say anything to suggest that to minimize the effort, because I think it's very important. And I understand, I heard Amy at the outset, her emphasis on it, which is very well taken. Maybe with those, if the group is sympathetic to the additions above that, that's enough to convey the qualifications and caveats one ought to bring to the enterprise.
Thank you, Russell. Nicole.
Yeah, I generally agree. I think that makes it much more clear. I was just wondering if we should also change, it says regarding non-lawyer representation on line 173 and other forms of assistance are meeting the needs of, and says their adjudications. I feel like maybe that should be changed in some way, maybe to are meeting the needs of participants or are meeting adjudicatory needs or something like that. It just reads awkwardly to me.
That's that could be like agencies, no? There means agencies, no?
Okay. Then maybe agency adjudications, not to repeat the word agency 18 times, but I don't know. It just read awkwardly to me, but that could also be a committee on style question.
It needs to be of the agency. I mean, yeah. If it's not clear to you, then what we mean there, or it's awkward, we should make it clear. Just trying to think if there's better language to use there. But we could do it, we could let the Committee on Style finesse it, but. Anything further on the changes here in this paragraph, this recommendation? Okay, I think that's it. Is 20 the last one? I think it might be. Do we have anything further on anything else other than the title? I knew you were going to go right back up to that title. Having gone through it now this one time, any further thoughts on our title? We have Adam's proposal, non-lawyer assistance and agency adjudications. We have representation and assistance, which I think is Russell's proposal, and then assistance and representation was the original, and I think Nina was in favor of that. Does anybody, have any, after we've now done this for a couple hours, any reaction to these options? Nicole?
Yeah, I think the word representation needs to be in the title, but I'm not extremely dedicated to either representation, assistance, or assistance and representation. And I also don't think if we do go with assistance and representation, I don't think it's necessary to go through and like reorganize it throughout the document, even though it's like even though it's different, it would be different in the title. But as long as representation is there, I think that that's all that's necessary.
Nina?
So how about non-lawyer assistance and representation in agency adjudications?
Okay, give that a whirl. Any reaction to that? Chris?
It's fine.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
I like it a
Russell.
lot. I think that works really well.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, well, we'll leave that there. Anything else to discuss? We can give you back some time if any further thoughts on the availability section? Have we beaten that? All right, I'm hearing silence. I think we have definitely more to think about with the next iteration of this, once we see how that section is going to play out. If you have any thoughts, I think Leah and Matt and Amy would love to hear from you. Anything else I'm forgetting, Leah?
I don't think so. Obviously, we will clean this up and make the committee on style edits, send around a clean copy before the next meeting.
Which is October 30th at 1 p.m. Please plan to be there.
Yep, and I think that's it.
Day before Halloween. First, I thought when I was like, are we meeting on Halloween? No, we're not meeting on Halloween.
You can still dress up.
Would make it fun, sure. Okay. Andy, did you wanna?
No, just thanks everyone. Great job. Nadine, your usual skillful and judicious leadership and getting through almost all of it in one meeting. Pretty impressive.
We have some more work to do, but yeah, we got through it. All right. Thank you very much. It's good to see everybody. I hope to see you next time. Thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye.